A Nevada woman pleads guilty for paying $5,000 in Bitcoin to have her ex-husband killed.
Imagine paying $5,000 to have someone murdered. You do your research. You find the website. You send the payment in Bitcoin, message by message, over months, describing exactly how you want it done. And the only reason the person you wanted dead is alive today is that the hitman you hired never existed at all. Not a hitman who backed out. Not a hitman who got caught before he could act. A hitman who was never real in the first place. A logo, a chat window, a payment address, built by con artists who understood something dark and specific about human nature. That if you build a convincing enough storefront, some people will pay strangers on the internet to end a life. For months, a woman in rural Nevada believed she had arranged her ex-husband's murder. She tracked his flights. She described his car. She told the men on the other end of the screen that she didn't care if his new girlfriend died alongside him, as long as he did. And the entire time on the other side of that connection, there was no hitman. There was no sniper. There was a scam artist, cashing in her Bitcoin, feeding her just enough hope to keep her paying, and quietly saving a man's life without ever meaning to. Before we go further, hit subscribe right now. This channel exists to pull apart cases exactly like this one, the ones where the truth is stranger and colder than fiction. And you don't want to miss what's coming in this story, because it gets darker than you think. This is the story of Christy Felkins, a website called Bissam Mafia, and the murder plot that only failed because it was already a lie. Christy Lynn Felkins lived in Fallon, Nevada, a small high-desert town built around a naval air station and alfalfa fields, the kind of place where everybody's second cousin works at the same handful of jobs. By early 2016, she was in her early 30s, recently divorced, and according to what she would eventually admit in federal court, she was thinking about money. Specifically, a life insurance policy. Specifically, what would happen to that policy the moment her ex-husband stopped being alive to collect against it. Her ex-husband, for his part, was simply living his life. Court records place him in Durham, North Carolina, in the period after their divorce, building something new, apparently with no idea that 1,500 miles away, in a small Nevada town he probably still thought of as harmless, his ex-wife had started looking for a way to have him killed. She didn't ask a cousin. She didn't go through a bar acquaintance or a shady coworker. She went to the dark web, and to understand exactly how close her ex-husband came to dying, you first have to understand the strange, predatory ecosystem she walked into. Here's something most people don't realize about the dark web murder-for-hire economy. Almost none of it is real. Over the last decade, cybersecurity researchers have identified dozens of sites on the Tor network advertising contract killings, professional-looking storefronts with pricing tiers, testimonials, even photographs of men in balaclavas holding weapons. Nearly every single one of them is a scam. Not a scam in the sense of overcharging. A scam in the purest sense. Take the money, deliver nothing, disappear. It sounds almost like good news, nobody's actually getting killed, until you realize that the people running these sites don't particularly care whether their scam gets someone killed anyway, because a client who believes the hit is coming often takes matters into their own hands when the website goes silent. The site Christy Felkins found in February 2016 was called Bissam Mafia. Bissam Mafia was, at the time, arguably the most infamous of these operations, a marketplace on the dark web built to look exactly like a professional criminal enterprise. The homepage featured a photograph of a masked man holding a gun, the kind of image built purely to intimidate and reassure in the same breath. Users were invited to submit a target's name, photograph, home address, and preferred method, then pay a fee typically ranging from $5,000 to $20,000 in Bitcoin. The site claimed ties to organized crime, Albanian, specifically, given the name Bisa, a reference to a code of honor in Albanian tradition twisted here into something grotesque. Behind it all was a figure known only by the handle Yura, whose real identity remained unknown for years. It was, according to every serious investigation that ever looked at it, entirely fake. There was no hitman. There was no organization. There was a man, or a small group of people, running what amounted to one of the most successful confidence scams in the history of the internet, pulling in, by later estimates, well over $6 million in cryptocurrency from people who genuinely believed they were commissioning a death. The site was eventually exposed by a British cybersecurity researcher named Chris Montero, who first stumbled onto it in 2016 while investigating dark web marketplaces professionally. Montero didn't just write a blog post calling it fake. He found a way into the backend of the site itself and began quietly compiling something he came to call the kill list, a running record of every target that had ever been submitted through the platform. Husbands trying to have wives killed. Business partners trying to remove colleagues. People targeting former friends, exes, even, in at least one documented case, a customer service representative who had failed to refund a gambling loss. Montero began passing names on that list to law enforcement, trying to warn people whose lives, unbeknownst to them, had a price tag attached in a dark corner of the internet they'd never visit. Here is the detail that should genuinely disturb you. The site being fake didn't make the danger fake. In 2016, a Minnesota man named Stephen Allwine tried to use Bissau Mafia to have his wife, Amy, killed. When the plot predictably went nowhere because there was no hitman coming, Allwine didn't shrug it off and move on. He murdered her himself. He was convicted of first-degree murder and is currently serving life without parole. In another documented case tied to the same network, a young American soldier was later found dead under circumstances investigators connected back to an order placed on one of these sites. The fake hitman didn't stop the intent. It just changed who eventually pulled the trigger, if anyone did at all. Montero's kill list, when later reviewed by journalists and researchers who gained access to portions of it, turned out to contain well over 100 submitted orders, and that number kept climbing the deeper anyone looked. Husbands wanting wives gone. Wives wanting husbands gone. Business disputes turned lethal in someone's imagination. A man who lost a bet on a sports gambling site apparently submitted an order against the customer service representative who wouldn't refund him. In at least one case reviewed by researchers, someone submitted an order targeting a 14-year-old boy. The people running the scam didn't screen for morality. They didn't care who the target was or why. They cared about the payment clearing. And here's the part that should sit uncomfortably with you for a moment. Some of the people on that list eventually found out, secondhand, years later, that someone in their life had once tried to have them killed. Imagine learning that a spouse, a business partner, a friend, once paid a stranger on the internet to end your life, and the only reason you're alive to hear about it is that the stranger was lying the whole time. There's no clean way to process a fact like that. It doesn't erase the relationship. It doesn't undo the years that came after. It just sits there, permanently, as a piece of information you can never unknow. This was the ecosystem Christy Felkins stepped into in February 2016, months before Montero's exposure of the site had fully made its way into public awareness. As far as she knew, she was dealing with professionals. She sent 12 Bitcoin into the site's wallet, worth roughly $5,000 at the time, a number that would later become almost darkly comedic given what happened to Bitcoin's value in the years that followed. Then she started talking to the site's administrator, and she didn't stop for months. Between February and May of 2016, Felkins fed the administrator a steady stream of real, specific, actionable information about her ex-husband's life. When she learned he had a flight booked into San Francisco with a planned drive up to Chico, California, she passed along the dates, the flight details, a description of his vehicle, and information about where he worked. This wasn't vague, wishful griping about an ex. This was operational planning, the kind of detail you'd only provide if you fully intended for someone to act on it. She had specific requests about how it should look. She didn't want it to look like an assassination. She wanted it to look like an accident, or better yet, a robbery that had spiraled out of control. She asked the administrator directly whether it was possible to stage it to look like a mugging gone wrong. When the site's administrator, following the scam's usual playbook of manufacturing extra fees, told her the job would require a sniper and tried to charge an additional $4,000 on top of what she'd already paid, Felkins refused. She told the administrator she'd already borrowed money up to her limit. Instead, she suggested something simpler and, in its own way, more chilling. Have the man they sent simply wait outside her ex-husband's location and shoot him while he was sitting in his car. Then there's the detail that tends to stop people cold when they hear it for the first time. When the site's administrator raised the possibility that her ex-husband's new girlfriend might be present, might be in the car with him, might get caught in the crossfire, Felkins said she didn't care. Whether the girlfriend lived or died wasn't a consideration that changed anything for her. She was in a hurry, too. In March 2016, worried about the timeline slipping, she offered to pay an additional $4,000 just to speed the process up, to make sure it happened sooner rather than later. And underneath all of it, there was fear, real and specific. Operating under the username KBGMKN, Felkins messaged the site administrator directly asking how she could be sure he wasn't law enforcement, explaining that she knew agencies like the FBI had the technical capability to infect a device and trace a user back to their real identity. She was being careful. She thought she was covering her tracks. She was, by every indication in the surviving message logs, entirely serious about what she was doing and entirely aware of how illegal it was. None of it mattered in the end in the way she intended, because Bissam Mafia, just like every other site of its kind, was never going to send anyone. Her ex-husband got on his flight to San Francisco. He drove up to Chico exactly as planned, and nothing happened to him at all. There was no man waiting outside. There was no car ambush. There was only a scammer somewhere on the other side of an anonymous connection, banking Bitcoin that would one day be worth roughly 25 times what she originally paid, and feeling no particular obligation to deliver anything in return. If this were a story with a tidier sense of justice, that would be the moment everything unraveled immediately. The scam exposed, the plot discovered, consequences arriving fast on its heels. That isn't what happened. For more than 3 years, nothing about this surfaced publicly at all. Felkins had paid to have a man killed, and when nothing came of it, she simply appears to have gone on with her life. Her ex-husband, as far as the public record shows, had no idea any of this had ever happened. He flew home. He kept living. The danger that had been circling him in message threads he never saw quietly evaporated, unnoticed. The break in the case, when it finally came, didn't come from a tip, a confession, or a nervous accomplice talking to police. It came from a permanent, public ledger that most people assume protects criminals far better than it actually does. In September 2019, federal investigators working as part of the Northern California Illicit Digital Economy Task Force, a coordinated effort pulling together agents from Homeland Security investigations, the FBI, the United States Postal Inspection Service, and the Drug Enforcement Administration, began working a broader investigation into cryptocurrency-funded crime connected to dark web murder-for-hire platforms. As part of that larger effort, investigators started tracing Bitcoin transactions tied to accounts like the one Bissam Mafia had used to collect payments. This is the part of the story that tends to surprise people, because Bitcoin has a reputation as an untraceable, anonymous currency, and that reputation is, in a very real and specific sense, wrong. Every Bitcoin transaction is recorded permanently on a public ledger called the blockchain. Anyone can see that a certain amount of Bitcoin moved from one wallet address to another at a certain time. What actually protects a user's anonymity isn't the currency itself. It's whether anyone can connect a real identity to a wallet address in the first place. Investigators followed the 12 Bitcoin Falcons had sent back through the blockchain to its point of origin, a peer-to-peer cryptocurrency exchange called Local Bitcoins.com, a platform based out of Finland that let users buy and sell Bitcoin directly with each other. Because the exchange was headquartered overseas, American investigators couldn't just issue a domestic subpoena and expect records the next morning. They had to work through formal international legal cooperation channels, a process that took months of coordination between two countries' legal systems just to get access to account records tied to a single transaction from years earlier. When those records finally came back, the case essentially solved itself. Falcons had purchased her Bitcoin using an account tied to her real email address and her real phone number. She hadn't built any layer of separation between her actual identity and the wallet she used to pay for a killing. The same digital trail she'd hoped would buy her distance and deniability turned out to be the exact thread investigators needed to pull, and it led directly back to a house in Fallon, Nevada. There's a quieter detail buried in this part of the timeline that's easy to skip past but worth pausing on. The investigation that eventually caught Falcons wasn't built around her specifically. She wasn't the target of a dedicated inquiry into her ex-husband's safety, and no one had flagged her as a person of interest in the years between 2016 and 2019. She was caught because a much larger task force was methodically working backward through years of dark web cryptocurrency transactions tied to murder-for-hire platforms broadly, sweeping up every name the blockchain eventually surrendered. In a very real sense, she wasn't caught because investigators were looking for her. She was caught because she happened to be standing inside a much bigger net that was already being pulled in for entirely different reasons. It's a sobering thought for anyone who assumes that the passage of time, on its own, makes old digital evidence safer to have created in the first place. Christy Falcons was indicted in September 2020 on a federal charge connected to using interstate commerce facilities in the commission of murder for hire, the kind of charge that, on paper, carries up to 10 years in federal prison. In March 2022, rather than take her case to a jury, she pleaded guilty. On July 20th, 2023, a United States District Court judge sentenced her to 5 years in federal prison, to be followed by 3 years of supervised release once she completed her sentence. She was ordered to surrender to the Bureau of Prisons that September to begin serving her time. No one died. That is the strange, almost unbearable gravity sitting at the center of this entire case. A fully formed murder plot, months of planning, real travel details, a specific weapon and method requested, a target identified down to the make of his car and the exact days he'd be in a specific city. And the only reason her ex-husband is alive today, walking around somewhere with likely no idea how close he came, is that the people she trusted to kill him were lying to her from the very first message. Technical analysis. What makes the Falcons case so useful from an investigative standpoint is how thoroughly it dismantles the popular myth of cryptocurrency anonymity. Bitcoin is frequently described, even now, as an untraceable form of payment, ideal for anyone trying to operate outside the reach of law enforcement. In reality, Bitcoin's entire architecture is built on radical transparency. Every transaction that has ever occurred on the network is permanently recorded and publicly viewable. The anonymity people associate with cryptocurrency doesn't come from the currency itself. It comes entirely from how carefully a user manages to separate their real-world identity from the wallet addresses they control. Falcons didn't manage that separation at all. She purchased her 12 Bitcoin through a peer-to-peer exchange, using an account registered to her actual email address and her actual phone number, the digital equivalent of walking into a bank and handing over a government ID before making a cash withdrawal you intended to keep secret. The moment investigators gained lawful access to that exchange's account records, there was no meaningful ambiguity left in the case. The blockchain told them where the money went. The exchange's records told them exactly who sent it. The second technical thread worth understanding is the significant time lag baked into cases like this one. The crime itself occurred in the spring of 2016. It wasn't uncovered by investigators until September 2019, and formal charges weren't filed until September 2020. A gap of roughly 4 years driven almost entirely by jurisdiction and international legal process. LocalBitcoins.com was a Finnish company, which meant pulling records from it required formal international legal cooperation between two governments rather than a simple domestic subpoena. That process, even when investigators know precisely what they're looking for and precisely where to find it, can take the better part of a year or more to move through the appropriate legal channels. It's a pattern worth remembering in any investigation involving offshore financial platforms or foreign-hosted digital services. The evidence frequently exists and is frequently solid once obtained, but the road to legally obtaining it can be long even when the destination is never really in doubt. There's a third technical layer to this case that extends beyond Felkins herself, and it's worth understanding because it shows how her case fits into something much larger. Bissam Mafia wasn't a small operation running one scam on one victim. Investigators and independent researchers eventually traced the platform, and the related sites that grew out of it, names like Crime Bay, Camorra Hitman, and Cosa Nostra, to a network that had pulled in an estimated $6.5 million in cryptocurrency from users across the world. In April 2022, Romanian authorities, working in coordination with American investigators, raided 7 properties and arrested 5 people connected to operating that entire network, seizing phones, laptops, hard drives, and cryptocurrency wallets in the process. The man believed to be at the center of it all, known only by the handle Yura, had evaded identification for years. The same blockchain forensics that unraveled Felkins's case, following cryptocurrency transactions back through exchanges to real identities, was part of the broader toolkit that eventually helped identify and dismantle the network that scammed her in the first place. Psychological analysis. What the surviving message logs reveal isn't a person acting in a single moment of rage or desperation. It's someone negotiating, methodically, over a period of months. Felkins haggled over price. She declined an attempted upsell for a sniper, citing her own financial limits, and proposed an alternative method herself, waiting outside, shooting him in his car, that was arguably simpler and required less specialized skill than what was originally pitched to her. She gave specific staging instructions, requesting that the killing be made to resemble a mugging or an accident rather than a targeted hit. That kind of detail-oriented, cost-conscious planning reflects premeditation in its purest form, not a single reckless impulse born out of anger. Her question to the site administrator about whether he might secretly be law enforcement is particularly telling. It shows she understood, at some level, exactly how serious and exactly how illegal what she was doing actually was. This wasn't a case of someone stumbling naively into a dark corner of the internet without grasping the stakes. She knew what she was buying. She was simply trying to make sure she didn't get caught buying it. Her stated indifference to the possibility that her ex-husband's girlfriend might be harmed or killed in the process is worth sitting with a little longer than it's comfortable to. It suggests the plan wasn't purely about removing one specific person from her life out of anger or heartbreak. Combined with prosecutors' emphasis on the anticipated life insurance payout as a central motive, it points toward something colder, a calculation in which a human life, and potentially a second one alongside it, had simply become an obstacle standing between Felkins and a financial outcome she wanted. When money becomes the organizing logic behind a plan to end someone's life, the plan tends to take on exactly this tone, not passionate, not chaotic, but procedural, negotiated, and largely indifferent to collateral cost. It's also worth placing her case beside Stephen Allwine's, the Minnesota man who used the same scam site around the same period, and when the fake hitman inevitably failed to deliver, escalated to killing his wife himself. Felkins never did that. Whether that's a meaningful difference in intent or simply a difference in circumstance and opportunity is impossible to know for certain from the outside looking in. What is certain is that her ex-husband's survival wasn't the result of her having a change of heart. It was the result of a scam artist somewhere on the other end of an anonymous chat window, taking her money and never sending anyone at all. That's the detail that makes this case so uniquely unsettling compared to almost any other murder-for-hire story out there. Usually in these cases, the story ends one of two ways. Either the plot is stopped by law enforcement intervening in time, some undercover sting or last-minute tip that pulls the trigger away from disaster, or the plot succeeds and a family is left grieving something that should never have happened. This case ends neither way. Nobody stopped Christy Felkins. No detective infiltrated the plot in progress. No wiretap picked up a phone call in real time and dispatched officers to a Chico Street corner. The only thing standing between her ex-husband and a bullet was the fact that the people she trusted to pull the trigger were never going to show up in the first place, because showing up was never part of their business model. It's not a story about justice arriving in time. It's a story about a would-be killer getting outsmarted by a bigger criminal, entirely by accident, with a man's life caught in the middle of two people who were both, in their own ways, lying to each other the whole time. Christy Felkins is currently serving a 5-year federal sentence for a murder that never happened, undone not by remorse and not by the justice system catching her in the act, but by the accident of hearing a con artist instead of an actual killer. Her ex-husband, by every account in the public record, never knew how close he came, or how far the danger actually reached, until years after it was already over. Somewhere in Nevada, a woman spent $5,000 trying to end a life, and the only thing standing between intention and tragedy was another criminal's greed. If this case disturbed you as much as it disturbed us, that's exactly why this channel exists. Hit subscribe right now so the next case like this one lands directly in front of you. Drop a comment and tell us what part of this story stuck with you the most, and we'll see you in the next one.